Welcome once again, my friends, and thank you for stopping by to listen to an old storyteller. Today we have a ghost story from Indiana in the United States, and the title of this story is Scary Cemetery. Going home late one dark night, a local Lafayette resident decided to take a shortcut through an older local cemetery. The burial ground was located at North 12th Street with busy streets nearby. The area had been the setting for many scares in Scott Whitman's youth. He and a group of friends would seek adventure playing pranks on one another near the cemetery in his adolescence. One of their favorite games to play was hide and seek, as the location only added to the thrill. Scott claimed that the games came to an abrupt end one afternoon when his friend Eddie fell, hitting his head, knocking him unconscious, and ended with a concussion. That was the last game that the boys had played together. They carried him home to his parents, knowing that they were in a great deal of trouble. Eddie's mother was hysterical as she had the boys help her put him in the car and take him to the hospital. That evening when Eddie came around, he claimed that he had seen a black shadow rush by as fast as lightning, and suddenly he received a strong push from behind, knocking him to the ground. His parents insisted that he had imagined the event and forbade Eddie from hanging around with Scott and the other boys. The next year, the family had moved out of state. On this particular night, Scott pulled on his sweatshirt, lifted his hood, and walked very fast. Although it was a late May night, there was a chill in the air. Frequently, he found himself glancing over his shoulder. He could not escape the feeling that someone was following him. As he walked along, he was reminded of Eddie's story. Reflecting back, he remembered the color of Eddie's skin when they came across him. His complexion was unusually white for his normally olive skin tone. At the time, Scott was more concerned for the trouble they were in and his friend than what actually may have happened. In fact, he admits that he always felt Eddie must have imagined the whole thing. But that opinion quickly changed that evening as he walked alone through the cemetery. As he neared a plot, he heard a rattling noise near a headstone. Thinking it must be a rodent, he quickened his step. Again, the feeling of being followed intensified, and he was regretting his choice to walk through the cemetery. The moonlight broke through the darkness, and he peered curiously about, stopping in his tracks when he heard an echoed whispering to the left of him. Scott turned his head in the direction of the sound, and to his horror, he saw what appeared to be a white shape bobbing up and down close to a tombstone. He didn't wait to investigate and hastily left for home in safety. Running blindly into the darkness, he didn't watch his footing and stumbled over a stone, landing on his knees. Sweating despite the coolness of the night, he regained his strength and stood ready to bolt again when a dark shadow went past him. Not able to control the shaking of his hands and the wobbling of his knees, he fled for his life for home. When he arrived home, his 24-year-old brother Brian was there with his girlfriend. The couple was startled when Scott burst in the door out of breath. He related his tale with much color and enthusiasm. Unfortunately, he was known for being a prankster and was not taken seriously. Still, Scott stuck to his tale until his brother agreed to go into the cemetery the next night and investigate. The next evening, Scott remained home while Brian and two of his friends went into the cemetery armed with flashlights. Thinking this was nothing more than a way to calm the nerves of his younger brother, Brian and the boys had a few beers before they left for the cemetery, figuring that they might as well have a good time while exploring. They were all a little lightheaded when they arrived. The group first found the atmosphere to be as calm as lightning bugs fluttered by. When they ventured farther into the cemetery, they claimed that the air got considerably cooler. They huddled together and talked about it. Then the group became suddenly quiet. a humming sound seemed to come from all directions. The sound was not very loud and seemed to vibrate throughout the area. Not sure what caused the sound, the boys decided that it was time to leave. No one wanted to admit how frightened he had become. By the time the group had reached the house, they decided that the sound must have been from a distant train. This theory made sense to them and helped calm their nerves. Inside the house, they assured Scott that there was nothing to be afraid of and that their investigations turned up empty. Still, considering that he experienced something paranormal, Scott shared his story one afternoon with an elderly neighbor. He was surprised when his neighbor, who had lived in the area his whole life, wasn't surprised with his story and believed him fully. Several years ago, he went on to tell Scott, some local boys set up a ghost watch at the cemetery. There had been a few ghost sightings, and after a third by a reliable resident who claimed to see a bobbing ghost by a headstone, some of the braver males decided to set up watch. They armed themselves with shotguns and a lantern. The first few nights passed quietly, and the ghost watch had nothing to report. But then, late one evening, they heard a muffled moan, a moan that sounded like that of a cow. Then they heard a rattle, and a white object could be seen bobbing up and down in the distance. The petrified amateur ghost hunters found the courage to pick up the lantern and raise their rifles ready to shoot. As they got closer, the white object seemed to disappear, and a black shadow seemed to shoot across the area back and forth several times with the speed of a locomotive. In terror, the boys began to shoot as they ran for safety. This did little to help the situation and only resulted in one of the boys skimming another's arm with a bullet. Although the wound was not life-threatening, the man reportedly told his friends, "If I don't make it, don't bury me here. There is an evil waiting in the shadows." When Scott's neighbor finished the story, a chill ran up his spine. He returned home and told his brother that he was moving, and did just that within the week. Moving several miles from the cemetery, he still had nightmares of his evening stroll. Almost 20 years later, Scott has never returned to the cemetery and refuses to drive by the neighborhood in which he grew up. Over the years, he has heard occasional stories regarding that particular cemetery and often stopped the tellers before they could share their story. He had had enough and laughed as he told me that he bought his burial plot well in his mid-20s just to be certain that he was not laid to rest anywhere near the area responsible for so many sleepless nights.
Thank you once again for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this story, please press that like button. Also, please help an old storyteller out by subscribing to my channel. The next story will be posted in a few days, so until then, may your story continue to be a good one.